There's a long history of bathers in art, and some artists do it better, in my opinion. Um, Now, centuries ago, people took a bath once a month. During medieval times, they actually were concerned that they would get deathly ill if they bathed. It had to be a smelly time in history. But in any case, Americans, of course, are known to bathe quite frequently. And so it's a long, long history. And so, anyway, we're going to talk about a few of the highlights. Visions of female nudes until the late 19th century were shown frolicking in water, dominating the romanticized and seductive act of bathing. The figure of the bather is one of the most common tropes in Western art, from Athens, ancient Athens, Greece to 1920s Paris and beyond. Painters, sculptors have presented bathing in a lot of different ways. In any case, I don't always quote artsy. It's not one of my favorite sites. It's inconsistent, but again, sometimes it's okay as long as you pair it with more academic sites. Figurative art is what we would call bathers. Obviously, these are people that focus on the figure. I'm not a very good figurative artist. People tend to have their specialty, if you will. But in any case, it's representational, usually. Sometimes it's abstract. It can be abstract. Certainly, some of Picasso's bathers, take that off so you're not so jingly, were abstract. So it shows figurative art is about people, animals, objects, opposite of abstraction. But figurative art is basically strong references to the real world, particularly to the human figure. Pierre-Auguste Renoir, his late works were almost exclusively bathers. He painted a large number of bathers. And in one very remarkable quote, he said that if women didn't have breasts, he would never have become a painter. So, well, it's honest. Jacques Louis David, a French artist, Death of Marat, very famous work in art history. This was a French revolutionary that David deeply admired. He received visitors with a writing table over his bath. A little bit of a different approach to an office, but he had a horrible skin condition, and he believed that it was believed that bathing might help him. Probably not that excessively, but who knows? He was stabbed by Charlotte Corday, who was delivering a letter. She was caught. The murder was very, very well publicized, well known. And in a time when you didn't have photography, you could produce prints of the event. You could produce sketches. You could produce paintings. And so this was a very well-known work. It's very neoclassical. Jacques-Louis David is a neoclassical artist. Paints in a manner that looks back to the classical past. Greco-Roman influences. You see that table that almost looks like a grave stele. And of course, this is an unfortunate bather. Probably a little different of a way to start out, but again, very much he's in his bathtub. It has a sculptural quality to it as well. There is that sense with neoclassical. They're very, very academically trained. They would have been using a meticulously small brush. They would have, this would have taken a while. This would have not been done in one day. Ingres, famous Turkish bath. This is a tondo, a round format tondo. And here, one of the best descriptions of this I've heard is that it's a description of the five senses. And it's a description of the five senses in a very sensual manner. So you have the sense of touch. There's lots of touch going on here. You have scent. You have a woman in the back applying scent, and again, they're touching hair. She's perfuming someone's hair, and certainly you have some in the very foreground. You have tea and little bits of food. There you have music, and this is an example of odalisque. Turkish odalisque were the fashion, and this is very much anglicized. He was not frequenting harems and doing sketches or anything like that. This was very much idealized and very white. Chances are good in these harems that you would also have olive skinned girls, darker skinned girls, and yet you don't have a lot of that. You do have one with a tambourine type of instrument, and then you also have what appears to be a slave girl next to the girl who's perfuming herself and the girl in front of her. So it's an interesting work. It's a voyeuristic work. It's a work that was created for the male gaze. This is something that Ingres was producing, and they were very popular. And art can be elevating, but it also can be an opportunity to look at beautiful nudes. So if you've taken art history classes, you've seen that this artist's name is often pronounced different ways. Ingres, again, it just tomato, different places, regional, and both are acceptable. So this is, again, a pretty famous work called Turkish Bath. It's exotic, beautiful fabrications, and again, this layering of women. The woman that is in the foreground, who's a little bit plump, and she's leaned back, she has her hands stretched above her head. The model for this particular female was actually his wife. Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Odalisque. Again, she's dressed, but even so, I wanted you to see the different types of odalisque. Young Turkish woman. So this is a bit more realistic of a rendering of a Turkish woman. Now, English women were abducted and certainly taken into these harems. And the stories were very much present in literature, and they were very popular. And so I think a lot of these ideas came from literature and came from some of the accounts of these harems. And again, they were very idealized. So, but this is a detail of a Turkish odalisque in another work. And so, again, completely a European fantasy of what a Turkish harem girl might look like. And certainly intriguing. Now, in there's one image. It's the resolution is not terrific, but it shows you a woman with 3 arms. He was trying to decide how the woman would look best arranged. So he actually has this drawing of his wife with 3 arms, but he was again just experimenting with placement here. So this also shows you some of the details that are really, really beautiful. So these ideas of these nudes in the harem were actually from Lady Mary Wortley Montagu's letters. She was the wife of an English ambassador and described baths in the Seraglio, which she was allowed to enter, and Ingres copied extracts from them in his notebook, and this was around 1817. And so several figures were taken from earlier pictures, but others were new. So he would kind of borrow from his own paintings sometimes, or a certain type of woman. Because if you look at the figures, some of them look like sisters, really. So again, taste is represented. Smell, touch, seeing. Again, it's very visually appealing. And certainly there's even the sense of hearing that's implied with the musical instruments. It is beautiful. It is. So here is a detail of a Turkish bath. And again, you can see it close up and you can see all the details of it. And especially in online, it kind of helps to be able to see close up. In a classroom situation, I can zoom in, but we do what we got to do. This is his large bather. So it was a theme he returned to time and time again. But there was definitely a market for it. And look at the realism in this. The realism is really quite astounding. Now this is impressionistic, and this is in complete contrast to the very academic painting I just showed you. So it's very active, the water is exquisite, there's lots of movement, and this is children at the beach. He said, I could not paint at all if I had to paint slowly. Every effect is so transient, it must be painted rapidly. And he sometimes painted a work in under 2 hours. That just blows my mind. But Sorolla is a Spanish impressionist. One of his main patrons was Archer Huntington, and this was Arabella Huntington's son. Arabella Huntington is associated with Huntington Library, which we have in Southern California. It's really quite gorgeous. And he was a millionaire railroad magnate with a fascination for Spanish culture. And so he picked up Sorolla's work and was very interested in Sorolla. And so he became very much established as a painter in the United States. But yet today he's not particularly well known. Some people don't seem to know of Sorolla at all, really. In any case, he was a really, really dynamic painter. Lots of movement in his work. Here's a detail. Again, you can just see almost how slashing he has created this this work, and the diagonal. The diagonal adds interest. In a painting, sometimes a diagonal is used to make the viewer kind of uncomfortable, but sometimes it is actually to create interest, and I think that's what it does here, a sense of movement. Sorolla, nude, 1900, and this looks to be his wife. But interesting, some of his more seductive images of his wife were not displayed until after his death. So, again, this is a Sorolla nude and portrait of a nude. Renoir's Little Blue Nude, late 1870s, and 1893, Bather Arranging Your Hair. And so it's interesting how different they are. One is much more softer than the other. The first one is much more impressionistic. The second one, he's returning to a more classical style. You don't see the brushwork quite as closely as you do in the first one. But the first one is, again, right smack dab in the middle of Impressionism, whereas, again, the later works, he started actually moving towards a more classical style. Nude in the Sunlight. This is a gorgeous work. I think it's one of my favorites of his work. There's so much movement to it. This dappled sunlight, which is what Renoir is known for, is that kind of dappled sunlight. You usually see it in like a party atmosphere in like the Dance at the Moulin de la Galette, that dappled sunlight all over the group of people, but it's equally effective over this nude. So at the second exhibition of paintings, there were 8 Impressionist exhibitions. Renoir exhibited 3 of his works, Dancing at the Moulin de la Galette, The Swing, and this work. The reviews were horrible on it, which I think is interesting. But this was so modern. And so one critic wrote, try to explain to Monsieur Renoir that a woman's torso is not a mass of decomposing flesh with green and purple spots, putrefied like a corpse. But this certainly did move him to work in a more classical style later in life, to a certain extent. And I also think that artist style changes. This looks like his wife, Aileen, and this is a nude bather. This also, again, has that very, very soft look to it. Certainly impressionistic, but it also has a classical aspect as well. This is actually a quote from an exhibition on these bathers. The bathers concludes the show underscores the fact that the artist was prone to voyeurism when it came to painting women, and perhaps overly sentimental as well. I can see that sentimental aspect in this work, but it also is his wife. But to say that all his female nudes are simply objectifications makes no allowance for the artist's fascination with flesh as a site of painterly experimentation. Bodies without clothing and at their best, by which I mean they are at the most synthetic. His nudes are curious and uncanny. And there's a wide range of them. Some of them I do find a tad insipid. Doesn't mean I don't love Renoir. I really do overall. But some of them I like less than others. And certainly he's fallen under a lot of criticism lately because of the way he objectified the female nude. But you also have to consider he was working in the late 1800s. You do have to contextualize that. Again, I think that's important. You can't throw out all these painters just because they were not feminist. Feminism hadn't even, well, it was starting. You had the suffragettes, but certainly women were very much objectified in this time period. Morisot bathers. Now this is from a woman's point of view, Berthe Morisot, and I think this is interesting because her females aren't nearly as seductive, are they? They're simply women bathing, and one is actually swimming. It's an entirely different look. Motifs, genres often exchanged by the artist. But this idea of bathers and being outside, this was kind of an unusual theme for Berthe Morisot. They did not do a lot of plein air painting, not nearly as many as the male impressionist. Renoir, Young Girl Bathing, 1892. And too, I think today we would have a lot to say about these young models floating in and out of an artist studio. But he was very much a popular artist. He was a very well-known artist. He was a famous artist by the end of his life. And as far as who were his models were servant girls. They were young women in the community. I think they even had like a nanny, essentially, that was a model for him for a short while as well. A bather with long hair and seated bather drying her leg. And so his last model, André, stated that he only painted her fat. Like Rubens, he often shows a preference for fuller figures. André actually ended up marrying one of his sons, which I think is intriguing. I think it was Jean. Seated bather, mid to late 1890s. And so here we see beautiful red hair too. That was often a preference of many of these artists. Again, I think it's color. Artists have a tremendous love of color. I think that's partly it, and certainly this has a lot of beautiful color. I love this, all the loose brushwork that's all around her. It's very abstract in a time when abstraction really didn't exist, the background especially. So Rubens' Three Graces, 1635. Again, when we talk about a woman being Rubenesque, it's a nice way of saying fat, curvy maybe, but you can certainly compare it to Renoir's 1914 bather. And so again, he did like them plumper. He said that a painting was complete when it looked, when the painting made him think he wanted to pinch her bum. I'm slightly paraphrasing. Renoir's Blonde Bathers, and 1883 Bather Drying Her Foot. So certainly the hair color does alternate as well. So he liked women. He liked women a lot. And certainly there was a preoccupation with the nudes. And he liked to paint the nudes outdoors. Not everyone loves the late nudes of Renoir. He's come to stand for the sexist male artist. Renoir took such presumptuous joy, this is from the New Yorker, joy in looking at naked women, always creamy or biscuit white. That was the fashion, that was the fad. I mean, you couldn't get too white. Women were supposed to always wear a parasol, always wear gloves, never let the sun see their face. The brush strokes are like roving figures. They're unsettling. I can see this point of view, definitely. Renoir's women strum no erotic nerves in me with their monotonously compact, rounded breast and thunderous thighs smushed into depthless landscapes and interiors. Their faces nearly always look dumb. I'm thinking this particular writer is not a huge fan of Renoir. Again, I like some of them better than others, but he's still part of the story. So the treatment's very, very different in this 1883 painting. The brushwork is thicker, the brush strokes are longer, shimmering, and his later period, the impasto, is thick in some places. Impasto means a thick application of paint. The dominant colors are reds and pink and white, very much so, for the women's naked flesh. And again, the brushwork on both of these is very much impressionistic. You have a sense of capturing the fleeting moment, that loose brushwork, dabs and dashes, and the changing values of light. These are things that interest the Impressionists. Renoir's Large Bathers. This is at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Very large, 3 foot 9 inches by 5 foot 7 inches. And this definitely is going back to a more classical tradition, like Poussin or Titian or Rubens. You definitely have a lot going on too. It's very, very grand in its presentation. Degas, Edgar Degas. I've never been able to quite decide whether I think Degas liked women or not. I think for the most part he didn't. He was very, very succinct in some of his opinions about women, and a lot of the quotes are not nice, not at all. Mary Cassatt and Edgar Degas had a good relationship. They were friends, but they also got annoyed with each other quite a bit. And she was a very active suffragette, and he was very opinionated about a women artist. He might say things like, well, she's a good painter for a woman. Those sorts of things. That was kind of what he was known for. Here we see Degas as a flaneur type, a gentleman stroller with the top hat, and he's dressed up. Edgar Degas had family money. He was not poor, and he certainly was in better financial straits than a lot of his Impressionist colleagues. He would have not been delighted to be labeled an Impressionist. It wasn't something, a label that he particularly liked. And he is different than the Impressionists. He's not painting outdoors as much. He's doing very few landscapes. He's primarily interested in ballet dancers and bathers, a large number of bathers. So born 1834, son of a banker, he loved art from childhood, but in 1853 enrolled in law school to please his father. A lot of artists attempt law school. I always think that's interesting. 2 years later, he'd abandoned law to study at Paris's School of Fine Arts, and his real training was following advice from his idol, Ingres, to draw lines and still draw more lines. And he did a lot of copying of old masters in the Louvre, which had to get permission to do it, but it was allowed. And that was a way in which he learned as well. It's still a way in which many artists learn as well. And so here we have a female nude drawing her neck. It's very, very active. That's one thing I think is really quite beautiful about this work. It's very gestural. It's very active. You have the sense that he's done this pretty quickly. I don't have the sense that he has taken hours and hours to do this. It has a sense of movement and gesture to it. Degas, Seated Nude, 1895. He would work from photographs. He enjoyed taking photographs and using them in his work. He liked to see women in different contortions. He described them as almost being like cats, the way in which they would turn and twist. And he has a curiosity about them, but there's a distance, a curiosity, a distance too in his work. No one's sure at all about Degas' sexuality. If anything, there's a sense of distance from people in general. Seated woman drawing her feet. 1896, woman drawing herself. But again, he does appear preoccupied with this motif for a long time. And look at the really, really dark contour line. The contour line is that dark part all around the back edge and along the side. It's really interesting because those contours and shadows is kind of what makes this work. Now, bathing. Often women are bathing in a small tub that's not much larger than a laundry basket. It would have been made out of tin, and women would have brought warm water to it, and then they would have bathed, and probably more of a weekly thing, more than anything else. And then if they had some wealth, they might have servants that actually would carry it to a large tub. And so that was something that not everybody had. And then if you really had some money, running water was something that some homes were starting to have. So here you can see the photograph of this, which is really interesting because you can see where he darkened the shadows like under the feet and around her shoulders. It's really quite remarkable. Again, this is also a bather, and this is often a way a woman bathed herself, was simply with one of these stands. And so here you have this woman bathing with this bowl and this pitcher, and they were like sold together, generally speaking, and they would be something that again, if you were lucky, you had somebody bringing you warm water in the morning, but not everybody had that. So you would have to heat the water, and you'd have to bring it to a private area and bathe there, although some people would close off the kitchen and simply bathe in there. Woman drying her foot, and seated woman combing her hair. And so there is a sense of looking through a keyhole at these women. There's a fascination about women and young women too, and there is definitely a sense of voyeurism to it. I think more than anything, he was interested in movement, and there's a few quotes of him talking about his ballerinas and saying, people think I like ballerinas, and I really like the way they move, and so I think it was more of an admiration for capturing movement. The first one has a really dark contour line along her back. And the second one has too, but it's really noticeable because of the different colors on the first one. Woman drawing herself, Vancouver Art Museum. Again, over and over and over. 1890s. And he's working in oils, he's working in pastels. This is one of my favorites, if only because it looks so awkward. After the bath, so we have a title that indicates she's getting out of the bathtub. And we don't know if she has a bad back and she's having difficulty getting out of the bathtub. There's someone here helping her, putting her into a towel. She looks very, very awkward. And this is a fairly good sized painting. It's surprising. But it does. It just looks strange to me, which is one of the reasons why it fascinates me so. And then you see a maidservant helping her. So this is a lady. And of course, it's a large tub. This is my favorite. I have a huge picture of this in my master retreat area in my bedroom, and it's called The Bath. It is stunning. He is an academic artist. This is very, very photographic in its effect. You have like a woman's watch that's kind of in that soap dish to the side. And then you have the really elaborate faucet, this swan faucet, which is really quite elaborate and lovely. So he's not painting a Venus figure, though. He's painting a modern woman. In that way, it's very, very contemporary. He's painting modernity. So again, not traditional, academic, yes. He was friends with Manet. The palette is also very similar to many of Manet's works as well. But just absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous work. Oh, and she is bathing in like a camise. So, you know, she obviously probably has somebody also assisting her. So she's kind of modest. She has this thin kind of covering on. And then the roses, which again make it look lovely. Her hair is done just so. And she's got a book that is just outside the bathtub, which I love as well because I'm a reader. I love to read. I love to read anywhere. So, just gorgeous. Henri Matisse, Bathers with a Turtle. Very different than what I've just shown you. This is much more modern, much more contemporary, much more abstracted, certainly very, very different than the academic work I just showed you that looked very realistic and nearly photographic. And so Matisse, the leader of the Fauves were interested in bright, unnatural color, and they were also interested in subjects like this, nude female and male bathers. And so here we have these bathers with a turtle. They're looking at this turtle, which is unique and different. There's really not a whole lot like it in art history. Artists such as Matisse, Vlaminck, Duran, Kirchner, and Picasso all had versions of this subject. And so here we certainly see a very unique example of bathers. The one that has her face arced, her neck arced down, and she's sitting, to me, almost looks sculptural. So he starts experimenting with dimension, a flattening process. He wasn't particularly obsessed with space. He was much more impressed with color. And so Bathers with a Turtle, he shows three nudes that resembles a child's drawing. It was actually Picasso that said one of his goals was to learn to draw like a child. None of the figures make eye contact with each other. Each appears absorbed in their own thoughts. Sky, water, earth, and these flat areas of color. And the palette's pretty limited as well. You know, you have a lot of the cool blues and the cool greens, and then you have the contrast of the red turtle. Matisse's Joy of Life, this has lots of bathers on it, and this is more of an Arcadia, of a pastoral paradise, this beautiful kind of menagerie of nudes, if you will. And so you see a little bit of pointillism, divisionism, these little dabs and dots that are just meticulously rendered. And Some some influences of Seurat's Sunday Afternoon on the island of Grand Jatte, but it's also very much original, and it's considered one of the key masterpieces of Henri Matisse. Brown Nude at Window, Ernst Ludwig Kirchner. So these modernists were definitely depicting nudity differently. Here, she's not nearly as objectified. Um, so there's certainly progress here. She's also a woman of some color, which that was also new, especially for the 1910s. This is pretty innovative, and there was this interest in African women. There was this interest in um, the darker skins and different looks, and different body types, and so it was very, very original. Kirchner is a German expressionist. His work was ridiculed by Hitler, which is probably one of the reasons why I adore Kirchner. But in any case, his work is rather bold, strong contour lines, elongated forms, somewhat mannerist, very contemporary, very modern. Even today, I think so. Bathers with Reeds, this is also Kirchner. So here he's showing the German printmaking tradition, also expressionism, and he's part of Die Brücke, which means the bridge. And it was basically a bridge between the traditional and the new and innovative and the youth of today. They wanted to have much more modern ideas. They wanted to separate themselves from tradition. They wanted something innovative and different. And they obtained that, but they also obtained a lot of ridicule because a lot of their works were pulled and actually exhibited in the Degenerate Art Exhibition under Hitler regime. And that was certainly hard on a lot of these artists that did not take well to having their works ridiculed, certainly. But the German expressionists were everything that Hitler detested in art. He liked traditional art. He wanted to look like exactly what it was. He didn't want to see red cows. This sense of individuality and expressionism was completely the opposite of what Hitler thought art should be. Some of you might not even know that he at one point aspired to be an artist. Go figure. Bathers at Moritzburg. This is also Kirchner. And again, you have the sense of Arcadia. You have the sense of these nudes frolicking in the water. It doesn't look like an orgy. It looks like a celebration of life. And so that is one of the things that seems to separate a lot of the expressionist works from the work of the past. It's not nearly as seductive, but it has a sense of action. It has a sense of boldness, but the colors are very different as well. So the German expressionists actually spent time at Moritzburg Lake, which was near Dresden. So this was a place that they would meet, and this was something that was starting to be a thing. This communal living, this bathing, and so it's believed that this is indeed what happened. And so they were reflecting on this kind of a utopian lifestyle, I think. But the colors are really, really interesting. They're very, very extreme. And this would be something that would be really, really different, especially for 1909, 1911. So you can have an image of this area that was so very, very popular. One of the more bewildering works in art history, and I'll probably include a clip in this, and this is Cezanne's Bathers, Large Bathers. It's at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. I think it's inexplicable. The scale is different. You have a man on a horse across the river. You have these women arranged in kind of a triangular construction, which is actually looking back to the art of the past, like Da Vinci and Raphael, who would have this triangular organization to their works. Cezanne was not comfortable with nudes, was not comfortable working from nature with these nude models walking around the studio. So he would work from photographs. A lot of the figures look mannerist, like they've just been stretched. They don't look natural. Like, for instance, the one on the side looks like if she's standing completely straight up, that she's at least 7 or 8 feet tall. He said he wanted to paint like Poussin, and this is his nod to classicism. But again, I think he had a real discomfort with the body. Not a people person, not at all. Considered by many, many scholars as his masterpiece. And I often have people go, is there any work you don't like? And I won't say I don't like it. I think it's beautiful and it's appealing, but I don't get it. It's so different than his other works. And he did do a few of these bathers. Um, and they're very different than a lot of his other works. And some people just absolutely love his bathers. They're a little inexplicable to me. Okay, I admit it. So, thank you.